In February of 2026, Pete Bittard went public with an accusation that should have made headlines far beyond the tech press. Bittard is a software developer. He maintains a free tool used by tens of millions of people around the world. And in a post on GitHub, he made a specific, documented claim that Microsoft had deliberately engineered a block against his software, not a bug, not a coincidence. In Bittard's own words, he was pretty sure Microsoft paid one of their employees to figure out a way to break the FIDO downloads explicitly, and then implemented that on their servers. The tool Microsoft allegedly targeted is called Rufus, and this was not the first time. It was not even the second time. It was the third time in 3 years that Microsoft had moved to shut down what Rufus could do, and the third time that Bittard had found a way around it. Rufus has been downloaded over 200 million times since its release in 2011. It is a tiny piece of software, no company behind it, no venture capital, no marketing department. Just one developer, a GitHub page, and a file so small it fits comfortably on a USB drive with room to spare. And yet Microsoft, a company worth nearly $3 trillion, apparently keeps coming back to fight it. To understand why, you need to understand what Rufus does, and what it keeps doing that Microsoft desperately does not want you to do. Because the 3 times Microsoft tried to stop it, the thing it was trying to stop was you taking back control of your own computer. Stay with me, because this story is about more than a software tool, it is about who owns your machine. Let me give you one number that puts all of this in context. Rufus is downloaded more than 3 million times every single month. 3 million every month. From a single developer who has never charged a cent for it, never taken advertising, and never sold user data. That is not a niche tool. That is infrastructure. That is the kind of reach that most commercial software companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to achieve. And Pete Bittard built it alone, on his own time, because he found Microsoft's official tools inadequate and decided to do something about it. The full name is the Reliable USB Formatting Utility with Source. Version 4.11 was released in October 2025. The software is available in 38 languages and weighs in at just over 1 megabyte. 1 megabyte. For context, that is smaller than most of the images on a modern web page. It requires no installation. You download it, you run it, it works. What it does is deceptively simple on the surface. It creates bootable USB drives. You take a disk image, a copy of an operating system like Windows or Linux, and Rufus burns it to a USB stick in a way that lets you boot a computer from it and install or run that operating system. Every IT professional, every system administrator, and millions of regular users who have ever reinstalled Windows have used a tool that does exactly this. But Rufus does something else, something Microsoft has found considerably less agreeable. If you have downloaded a Windows 11 image, Rufus gives you the ability to remove the hardware requirements for more than 4 gigabytes of RAM, Secure Boot, and TPM2, allowing Windows 11 to run on older hardware. It lets you remove the requirement for an online Microsoft account, allowing you to use Windows with only a local user account. And it lets you turn off data collection by skipping Microsoft's privacy questions entirely. In other words, Rufus gives you back options that Microsoft has been systematically taking away from you, and that is why Microsoft keeps trying to stop it, and that is why this story keeps repeating. But the specific moments, the 3 confrontations, tell you something important about how this all works. Let me walk you through each one. To understand this conflict, you need to understand the specific battle that Windows 11 started, and why millions of users found themselves needing a tool like Rufus just to install an operating system on hardware they already owned. When Microsoft launched Windows 11 in October 2021, it arrived with a list of hardware requirements that had never existed before. Every previous version of Windows could be installed on virtually any modern PC. Windows 11 required something called TPM2, a security chip, along with secure boot support and a list of approved processors. Machines manufactured before roughly 2017 were declared officially incompatible, regardless of whether they ran perfectly well. Microsoft enforced strict hardware requirements, including approved CPUs, a minimum of 4 gigabytes of RAM, and a TPM chip for security. These requirements were seen by many as contributing to e-waste, violating privacy, or simply being unnecessarily restrictive. There was also a second change, introduced with the Windows 11 version 22H2 update. Starting with Windows 11 version 22H2, Microsoft no longer allowed users to set up Windows 11 without an internet connection or without using a Microsoft account. You could not simply install Windows on your own machine and create a local account the way you had been doing since Windows 95. Microsoft now required you to sign in to a Microsoft account, handing over your email address, your sign-in credentials, and your data. Before you could use an operating system you had either purchased or received with a computer you owned. The stated reasons were security and personalization. The practical effect was that Microsoft inserted itself permanently between you and your own machine. Pete Bittard first released Rufus in December 2011, originally as a replacement for an aging HP tool for creating bootable USB drives. It was a technical project born from frustration with inadequate software. Over the following decade, it grew into one of the most widely trusted tools in Windows administration. When Windows 11 arrived with its new walls, Rufus was perfectly positioned to knock them down. And it did, which is when Microsoft started paying attention. The first confrontation happened through the ordinary mechanics of Windows updates. When Microsoft released Windows 11 version 24H2 in late 2024, something changed in the Windows setup process. A file called bypass NRO, CMD, a script that had previously allowed users to bypass the Microsoft account requirement during installation, was quietly removed. It had been there in earlier builds. Users had relied on it. Then one day, it was simply gone. The bypass NRO, CMD script, previously used to circumvent Microsoft account restrictions on Windows 11 24H2 systems, was disabled by Microsoft. Pete Bittard responded the way he always does. He found another way. Rufus automatically makes the necessary registry edits to re-establish the BYPASSNRO functionality. Even with Windows 11 24H2 having removed the native bypass, Rufus reintroduces it through a different mechanism. Rufus version 4.6, released in October 2024, integrated the in-place upgrade workaround registry tweak directly into the application, making it available to anyone with a USB drive and 5 minutes to spare. Microsoft removed the file. Rufus recreated its effect through a different path. First confrontation, Rufus wins. The second confrontation was more pointed. Microsoft was aware that Rufus used a PowerShell script called Fido to automate the download of Windows ISO files, allowing users to download Windows installation images directly through Rufus without going through Microsoft's official media creation tool. This was convenient, well-documented, and completely legal. Users were downloading files that Microsoft made publicly available. Rufus just made it easier. Pete Bittard believes Microsoft intentionally detected the Fido script, writing that they are detecting the script, which quite frankly is not that hard to do since it's open source, though it does require active intentional involvement from Microsoft to break the script downloads. Bittard patched Rufus to work around the new verification checks, and downloads through Fido worked again. Second confrontation, Rufus wins. The third confrontation was the February 2026 incident, the most public, the most pointed, and the one that produced Bittard's accusation on GitHub. Rufus developers accused Microsoft of blocking access to the latest Windows 11 ISOs, with Windows insiders being met with IP bans after attempting to download the latest builds. Bittard described active, intentional interference from Microsoft's servers. In reality, the situation was more nuanced. The same blocks affected direct downloads from Microsoft's own website, suggesting a fraud detection system that caught Rufus users in its net. But Bittard patched Rufus to work around the new verification checks, and downloads worked again. Third confrontation, Rufus wins. 3 rounds, 3 attempts to clip Rufus's capabilities, 3 patches. But the deeper question, why Microsoft keeps coming back, leads somewhere important. The 3 confrontations were not random. They all cluster around the same thing: Microsoft's determination to control the conditions under which you install and use Windows. The Microsoft account requirement is the clearest example. When you sign into Windows with a Microsoft account, Microsoft knows which device you are using, when you signed in, what applications you run, and in some configurations, what files you access. The data has commercial value. It feeds into advertising profiles, productivity, telemetry, and the broader ecosystem Microsoft is building around its cloud services. A local account produces none of that data, which is precisely why Microsoft has progressively made local accounts harder to create, and why every tool that makes local accounts easier represents, from Microsoft's perspective, money left on the table. The TPM and hardware requirements tell a related story. An official hardware requirement has an official commercial consequence. People buy new computers. Many observers characterized Microsoft's strict hardware requirements as contributing to e-waste and violations of user privacy. Consumer advocates pointed out that millions of machines that ran Windows 10 flawlessly were being declared obsolete by requirements that had less to do with actual performance and more to do with pushing users toward new hardware. Purchases: hardware that ships with Windows 11 pre-installed, fully configured with Microsoft accounts, telemetry enabled, and all the factory defaults that benefit Microsoft rather than the person sitting in front of the screen. Rufus cuts across all of this. It lets you take a machine Microsoft says is too old and run a current operating system on it. It lets you create a local account on a machine Microsoft insists needs to be connected to its servers. It lets you turn off the data collection that Microsoft politely frames as optional but architecturally embeds into setup as the default path. Rufus version 4.9, released in June 2025, fixed several technical issues. By January 2026, Rufus 4.12 had been released, enhancing compatibility with SSD devices and optimizing detection for Microsoft's own formats. The tool keeps getting better, keeps adapting, and keeps finding paths around whatever Microsoft closes off. And the person doing all of this adapting is one individual, not a team, not a company, not a funded organization, just Pete Bittard, watching the chessboard and making his move. Think about what the Microsoft account requirement actually means for a specific person. Picture a retired teacher in her early 60s. She has a laptop she bought in 2016. It ran Windows 10 without complaint for years. Her computer knowledge is solid but not technical. She can manage her files, run her email, handle the things she needs to handle. When Windows 10 reaches its end of support in October 2025, she is told her laptop cannot run Windows 11. The TPM chip is not present. The processor is not on the approved list. Microsoft's recommendation, implicit in how the update process works, is that she should buy a new computer. She does not need a new computer. Her computer works, but Microsoft has declared it obsolete because it does not meet requirements that did not exist when she bought it. This is the person Rufus was built for, not in the sense that Pete Bittard had her specifically in mind, but in the sense that his tool is the thing standing between her and an unnecessary purchase. With Rufus, she can take a Windows 11 ISO, burn it to a USB stick, and install a current operating system on hardware Microsoft declared incompatible. Without Rufus, her options are buy new hardware, switch to Linux, or stay on an unsupported version of Windows and accept the security risks. The Microsoft account requirement adds another layer. During Windows 11 setup, Microsoft pushes users toward creating or signing into a Microsoft account. Rufus gives you the ability to override Microsoft's account mandate, check a box to remove the requirement for an online Microsoft account, and even predefine a username for a local account. For someone who has spent years setting up computers the way they prefer, local account, no cloud sync, their files on their machine, this is not a minor inconvenience. It is a fundamental change to a relationship they established with their own property. And the reason Microsoft insists on it is not security. Despite the language used in the official documentation, it is data. It is commercial access to their behavior on the machine they paid for. Pete Bittard did not set out to become the person standing between Microsoft and its users' data. He set out to build a better USB formatting tool. But that is where this road led, and he has not stepped back from it once. It would be dishonest to present this as a clean story with a clear villain and a clear hero. The reality, as always, is more layered. The optimistic case for Rufus is strong. It is free, open source, actively maintained, and has accumulated over 200 million downloads without a single documented case of deceptive behavior. Pete Bittard is transparent on GitHub to an unusual degree. When Microsoft moves against his tool, he discusses it publicly, with specifics and with his reasoning. The tool does exactly what it says it does, and users around the world rely on it with justified confidence. The optimistic case for Microsoft's position is also not nothing. TPM2 is a genuine security technology. Machines without it are more vulnerable to certain classes of attack, particularly those targeting boot integrity. The secure boot requirement similarly addresses real threat vectors. Microsoft's argument that older hardware creates security surface is not invented. It is incomplete. It ignores the environmental cost of hardware obsolescence, the financial burden on users with limited means, and the fact that the hardware in question often runs perfectly well, but it is not fabricated. On the Microsoft account requirement, the honest position is that the security framing is real but secondary. The commercial motive is primary. Microsoft's cloud business depends on user data and account linkage in ways that are worth billions of dollars annually. A local account is not less secure than a Microsoft account for most home users. It is simply less profitable for Microsoft. On the FIDO script incidents, there is no direct evidence confirming that Microsoft deliberately targeted Rufus specifically. The same blocks that affected Rufus also affected direct downloads from Microsoft's own website, suggesting a fraud detection system that caught Rufus users as collateral rather than a targeted strike against the application. Bittard's interpretation that this required active intentional involvement may be correct, but the alternative explanation that Microsoft implemented server-side verification without specifically thinking about Rufus is also plausible. The pattern across 3 years suggests intent. Individual incidents are ambiguous. What is not ambiguous is the outcome. Every time Rufus has been blocked, Rufus has found a way around it. And every time Microsoft has hardened its requirements, the community of users relying on Rufus has grown rather than shrunk. That is a market signal. It is telling you something about how many people feel the relationship with Microsoft has changed, and about how many of them have decided that Pete Bittard's 2-megabyte tool represents their interests better than the company that built the operating system. Let us come back to where we started. February 2026. Pete Bittard on GitHub, publicly accusing Microsoft of paying an employee to deliberately break his software, a software that 3 million people download every single month. A software built by one person with no budget, no company, and no commercial interest, beyond the conviction that people should be able to use their own computers the way they choose. And within days of that accusation being made, Rufus had already patched around the block, again. 3 attempts, 3 defeats, not because Rufus is more powerful than Microsoft, it obviously is not, but because the logic of open source software, when applied by someone who is paying attention and who understands what Microsoft is doing, is remarkably hard to permanently stop. Every time Microsoft closes a door, Bittard builds a window. Every time Microsoft removes a script, Bittard finds a registry path. Every time Microsoft tightens the funnel, Bittard widens the opening. The next video in this series goes further into what Microsoft's endgame actually looks like, specifically what happens to the hundreds of millions of machines running Windows 10 when support ends, and what your real options are when that clock runs out. Because Rufus is part of that story too. And the decisions being made right now by by both Microsoft and by users, are going to define what the next decade of personal computing looks like. If you have been watching this channel because you feel like something has changed, because the company whose software you have used for 30 years has started making decisions that serve its shareholders better than they serve you, then this is the content you came for. Subscribing is how you see where this story goes next, not as a transaction, as a continuation.